The hum was the first thing you noticed on Terminus. The constant, low-frequency vibration of machinery that kept 3,000 souls alive in the heart of a dead rock. It was the sound of survival, the thrum of atmospheric processors, the groan of centrifugal rings generating a sliver of gravity, the distant, rhythmic crunch of mining lasers chewing through the asteroid's iron-rich core. Elias Vance had lived with the hum his entire life, a metallic lullaby that had replaced the whisper of wind and the crash of waves his grandparents spoke of in hushed, nostalgic tones. To him, it was the sound of home, a home carved out of the void at the farthest edge of the shattered human sphere, a forgotten tombstone marking the grave of an empire. On the command deck of mining operations, the hum was almost a roar, a symphony of industry conducted through thick plasteel viewports that looked out not on stars, but on the floodlit, pockmarked expanse of the excavation pit. Elias ran a hand over his tired face, the gray stubble on his jaw as coarse as the iron filings that coated every surface on the station. Before him, a holographic display flickered, showing the stress readouts for structural beam G14, a critical support in the lower shafts. It was glowing a furious, angry red, a color he had come to despise more than any other. "It's not gonna hold, is it, Anya?" his lead technician asked from beside him, her voice tight with the same fatigue that seemed to permeate the recycled air. She was young, barely 20, with a grease smudge on her cheek and a fire in her eyes that reminded Elias of himself a decade ago. Before the relentless grind of keeping Terminus from collapsing in on itself had worn his optimism down to a nub, he shook his head, not taking his eyes off the angry red line. "The micro-fractures are spreading. We patch one and two more appear. The whole section is compromised. The core resonance from the new plasma drills is shaking the asteroid apart from the inside out." He zoomed in on the schematic, his fingers deftly manipulating the holographic controls. "We need to shut down the entire lower quadrant, reinforce the struts with everything we have left, and pray. It'll cut our ore production by 40%. Anya let out a low whistle. "Administrator Thorne will love that. 40% less ore means 40% less water from the ice processors, 40% less nutrient paste from the hydroponics bay." Elias finally looked away from the display, his gaze meeting hers. "I know, but the alternative is that G14 fails, the lower quadrant collapses, and we lose half our mining crews and the only drills powerful enough to get us to the next ore seam. We can live on short rations. We can't live if we're buried under 1,000,000 tons of rock." It was the constant, brutal calculus of life on Terminus, a series of impossible choices where the best outcome was simply a slower death. They were the descendants of ghosts, the children of the engineers and workers who had been stationed here when the scourge came, when the galaxy burned, and when the triumphant signal of the United Earth colonies went silent, replaced by a terrifying, static hiss that had lasted for 70 years. They had survived because they were too remote to matter, a forgotten speck in a forgotten system, living off the scraps of a dead civilization and the iron in their rock. The war was history, a horror story told to children to make them behave, a collection of fragmented data logs and cautionary tales. The scourge, the insectoid alien race that had ripped through human space like a plague, were just monsters in those stories, boogeymen from a past that felt as distant as Earth itself. That all changed on Cycle 3417 of the station's founding. It began not with a bang, but with a whisper, a single anomalous blip on the deep-range sensor array, a system so old and neglected it was mostly used to track inbound meteoroids. A junior sensor tech, a kid named Leo with more curiosity than sense, was the one who found it. A ghost in the machine moving against the celestial drift. He had called Elias, not Thorn, because he knew the administrator would dismiss it as a sensor ghost without a second thought. But Vance, the man who knew every circuit and every line of code that kept Terminus breathing, might actually listen. Elias stood beside him now, staring at the faint signature on the main screen. A knot tightening in his stomach. It wasn't a rock. It was too small, and its trajectory was too deliberate. A controlled deceleration burn that spoke of active propulsion. It was a ship. It's broadcasting, Leo whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and awe. On an old colonial frequency, it's a distress call. And he patched the audio through, and a voice, warped by static and distance, filled the quiet of the sensor station. Day, Mayday, this is U.C.S. Nomad, requesting immediate assistance. Hull breach. Life support failing. Is anyone there? The voice was human. It was the first human voice from outside Terminus anyone had heard in 70 years. The sound of it, the sheer impossible reality of it, was like a physical blow. The news spread through the station's warren of tunnels and habitation modules like a shockwave. For the first time, though, the constant hum of the machinery was drowned out by the buzz of human voices, a cacophony of hope, fear, and disbelief. Administrator Thorn convened an emergency council session in the station's cramped command center, a room that had been designed for managing mining operations, not galactic diplomacy. Thorn was a man who had been born old, his face a permanent mask of cautious pessimism, his leadership defined by one overriding principle: do not be seen. Survival, for him, was a function of obscurity. We do nothing, he declared, his voice leaving no room for argument. We do not respond. We power down all non-essential external systems. We become a cold, dead rock until it passes. We do not know who is on that ship or what might have followed it. An old miner named Gregor, his face a road map of scars from a dozen close calls in the tunnels, slammed his fist on the metal table. It's a human ship. Marcus, a distress call. Have we forgotten what that means? We can't just let them die out there. Thorn's gaze was icy. What we can't do, Gregor, is risk the lives of the 3,000 people on this station for one unknown vessel. Remember the stories. The Scourge are hunters. They don't leave survivors. If this ship escaped them, they could be tracking its energy signature right to our doorstep. Our isolation is our only defense. We break that, and we are signing our own death warrant. Elias, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke, his voice calm and measured, cutting through the rising tension. Thorn is right. It's a risk. But Gregor is right, too. We have a moral obligation. We don't have to bring them here. I can take a shuttle, the Prospector, rig it for low power running. I'll go out, assess the situation, and retrieve any survivors or supplies. Minimal risk. We can't just sit here and listen to them die on the radio. Thorn glared at him, his thin lips pressed into a tight line. He saw the way the others on the council looked at Elias, the respect he commanded. Vance was the one who kept the station running, the one who went into the collapsing tunnels and fixed the failing reactors. He was a man of action, and Thorn, a man of cautious inaction, resented him for it. This is a foolish, sentimental gesture. Elias, Thorn said, it will be your undoing. Elias met his gaze without flinching. Perhaps, but doing nothing will be ours. The Prospector was little more than a tin can with an engine, a rugged, unpressurized utility shuttle designed for short-range survey missions. Elias, along with Anya and a burly security officer named Jax, sat strapped into the cramped cockpit, the shuttle's frame vibrating as it disengaged from Terminus. Through the forward viewport, the station was a jagged silhouette against the starfield, its few lights like lonely embers in an infinite darkness. "All systems nominal," Anya reported, her voice steady despite the tension. "Running on passive sensors only. We're a ghost." Elias guided the shuttle forward, his hands sure on the controls. Out here, the hum was gone, replaced by an unnerving, absolute silence, broken only by the hiss of their own life support. The silence of the void felt alien, unnatural. It was the sound of the grave. They found the Nomad adrift in the asteroid's shadow, a wounded beast against the black. It was a vessel of a design Elias had only ever seen in old schematics, a colonial exploration frigate, its hull a lattice of sleek lines and elegant curves now marred by horrific, gaping wounds. Great, claw-like gashes were torn across its flanks, as if some gargantuan predator had tried to rip it open. The metal was scorched and peeled back, revealing the charred skeleton of the decks within. It was a ship that had been through hell. No life signs. Jax grunted from the back, his eyes glued to the short-range biosensor, and no energy readings. "She's dead in the water." Elias brought the prospector in close, his searchlights playing over the silent vessel. The name Nomad was still visible on the bow, painted in the faded blue of the United Colonies fleet. A ghost from a dead world. "I'm going over," Elias said, already reaching for his helmet. "Anya, you have the con. Jax, you're with me. If you see so much as a flicker on the energy sensors, you get out of here. No arguments." The airlock of the Nomad was forced. The inner door buckled and twisted. They had to cut their way through. The moment the seal was broken, the smell hit them, even through their suit filters, the coppery tang of old blood and the acrid stench of burnt electronics. Inside, the ship was a tomb. The corridors were a chaotic mess of floating debris, emergency lights casting a weak, strobing red glow over scenes of carnage. Bodies in colonial fleet uniforms floated in the zero gravity, their features frozen in expressions of shock and terror. They hadn't just been killed, they had been butchered. Their armor was shredded, torn apart by something with incredible strength and savagery. Jax let out a quiet curse. "The Scourge. It has to be." Elias pushed forward, his mag boots clanking on the deck plating. The distress call came from the bridge. If anyone survived, they'd be there. The bridge was just as bad. Control consoles were shattered, the main view screen a spiderweb of cracks looking out into the void. More bodies floated in the silence, a silent testament to the ship's final, desperate battle. But as his light swept across the captain's chair, he saw it. A flicker of movement. A figure was slumped in the chair, clad in combat armor that was as battered as the ship itself. A helmet lay on the floor nearby. As they approached, the figure stirred, a weak hand raising a plasma pistol. A woman's voice, raspy and weak, crackled over their comms. "Stay back." Elias raised his hand slowly, his own weapon holstered. "We're not here to hurt you. We're from Terminus. We heard your distress call." The pistol wavered. The woman coughed, a racking, painful sound. She was injured, badly. Jax moved forward cautiously. "We can help you. We have medical supplies." The woman slumped further, the pistol clattering to the deck. Jax was at her side in an instant, checking her vitals. "She's alive, barely." multiple lacerations, signs of internal bleeding. Elias knelt beside her as Jax began applying a medical sealant to a deep gash on her arm. The woman's eyes, a startlingly fierce shade of green, fluttered open, locking onto his. You have to listen," she rasped, her breath hitching. "The mission, it can't fail." Elias leaned closer. "What mission? Who are you?" Her voice was a bare whisper, each word a struggle. "Corporal Eva Rostova, Aegis Fleet." Elias felt a jolt, but as if the cold of the void had seeped directly into his bones. Aegis Fleet. It was a name from the history logs, the designation for the last remnants of the United Colonies military that had made a final, suicidal stand at the Battle of Saul. They had been wiped out, annihilated. "That's impossible," Elias breathed. "The Aegis Fleet was destroyed 70 years ago." A grim, pained smile touched her lips. "Reports of our death were greatly exaggerated." She coughed again, a spray of blood appearing at the corner of her mouth. "The war, it never ended. We've been fighting, hiding, a scattered resistance, picking at the scourge where we can. The Nomad, we were on a mission of last resort. We were searching for Haven." Haven, another legend, a myth whispered about in the early days after the fall. A secret, pre-war colony, established in total secrecy in a system shielded by a natural nebula. A place where humanity could rebuild, a final sanctuary, and it was a fairy tale. "We found it," Rostova whispered, her eyes burning with a desperate intensity. "Or part of it, a data core from a long-lost probe. It has a piece of the route, the final navigational key. But we were ambushed. They knew we were coming." She fumbled at her belt with a trembling hand, unclipping a small armored data cylinder. She pressed it into his hand, but her grip was surprisingly strong. "You have to get this to the fleet, to the flagship Odyssey. They are waiting at the rendezvous in the Serpent's Nebula. Without this, all hope is lost." Elias stared at the cylinder in his palm, its metal cold against his glove. This small object held the weight of a dying species' last hope. It was insane. It was impossible. But the dying woman before him, the butchered crew, the clawed hull of the Nomad, it was all terribly real. His world, his carefully maintained, predictable, isolated world, was shattering. The hum of Terminus, the angry red lines on his schematics, the political squabbles with Thorn, it all seemed so small, so insignificant in the face of this. A piercing alarm suddenly blared through their suit comms. Anya's voice, sharp with panic. "Elias, get out of there! Now, long-range sensors just lit up. A ship just dropped out of subspace at the edge of the system. It's a Scourge hunter-killer, and it's heading your way. They followed you." Elias looked from the data core in his hand to the dying soldier, and then back towards his shuttle. He heard her last faint whisper. "They're here." Thorn had been right. He had led the boogeyman right to their door. The silence of the void was about to be broken by the screams of his people, and the quiet, predictable hum of Terminus was about to be replaced by the roar of an ancient, unfinished war. The universe collapsed into a single, frantic, imperative escape. Anya's panicked warning was still echoing in his helmet as Elias grabbed the dying soldier, his mind a maelstrom of adrenaline and disbelief. "Jax, take her legs. We're not leaving her," he yelled, the order cutting through the chaos. Jax, ever the professional, didn't hesitate. hooking his arms under Rostova's knees. Together, they navigated the zero-gravity carnage of the Nomad's corridors, a clumsy three-person ballet through a graveyard of floating bodies and shattered equipment. Rostova was a deadweight between them, her breathing a shallow, ragged whisper over the private comm channel. Elias's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic counter-rhythm to the steady clank of his mag boots on the deck. Every shadow seemed to writhe with insectoid shapes. Every flicker of a dying emergency light felt like the glint of a hunter's eyes. They burst back into the Nomad's breached airlock and launched themselves across the few meters of void to the prospector's open hatch. "Go! Go! Go!" Elias roared as they tumbled inside. Anya was already at the helm, her face pale in the glow of the console, her hands flying across the controls. "Seal the hatch. Thrusters hot." The shuttle's outer door hissed shut just as Elias and Jack secured the barely conscious Rostova into a spare seat. "I have a visual." Anya's voice was strained, her knuckles white where she gripped the flight stick. "Oh, stars and stones." On the main view screen, the Scourge ship materialized. It wasn't a ship in any human sense of the word. It was a nightmare given form. A predator carved from obsidian and bone. Its design was brutally organic, a chitinous, segmented vessel that resembled a deep-sea crustacean crossed with a praying mantis. Jagged spurs and weapon emplacements jutted from its hull at unnatural angles, and a sickly green bioluminescence pulsed rhythmically from deep within its structure, like the beating of a malevolent heart. This was no boogeyman from a history log. This was a monster, and it was real. A lance of emerald energy by Psi, impossibly fast, tore through the space where they had been moments before, impacting the silent hull of the Nomad. The colonial frigate, already a tomb, erupted in a silent, blossoming flower of fire and twisted metal. The explosion a final, violent death rattle. "Evasive maneuvers," Elias yelled, strapping himself into the co-pilot seat. "Get us into the graveyard, now!" Anya needed no encouragement. The Prospector, a vessel designed for the delicate work of geological surveying, bucked and screamed as she threw it into a hard burn, plunging them into the dense, chaotic asteroid field that surrounded Terminus. Their pursuer was faster, more agile, a shark in its element. Green plasma bolts sizzled past their viewport, close enough to make the shuttle's hull groan in protest. The chase was a desperate, terrifying flight through a maze of tumbling rock and iron. Elias, with his lifetime of experience navigating these fields, became Anya's eyes, his voice a steady stream of commands. "Hard port. There's a channel opening at Mark 37. Use that large nickel iron chunk for cover. Kill the inertial dampeners for a tighter turn." He was asking the old shuttle to perform acrobatics it was never built for. Alarms shrieked from the console as the engines overheated and the structural integrity wavered. A plasma bolt clipped a trailing asteroid, showering their hull with incandescent shrapnel that sounded like a hailstorm on the thin metal. They were bleeding energy, their signature a brilliant beacon for the hunter. They wouldn't last another 5 minutes. "They're hurting us," Jax grunted from the back, his hands braced against the bulkhead. "Cutting off our angles, pushing us into open space." Elias's mind raced, chewing on the impossible problem. They needed a diversion, something big enough to draw the monster's attention. His eyes fell on the energy readings for the shattered Nomad, its fission reactor. Miraculously, still intact amidst the wreckage, now glowing like a miniature sun. An idea, born of desperation, sparked in his mind. "Anya, get me a firing solution on the Nomad's reactor core. Jax, load the geological penetrator charge into the forward launch tube." Anya stared at him, her eyes wide. The what, Elias? That's a mining tool, not a weapon. It has a maximum range of 5 kilometers. We don't need range, Elias said, his voice grim. We just need a trigger. He took the controls, pushing the shuddering shuttle through one last, gut-wrenching turn that took them skimming across the surface of a massive asteroid, temporarily breaking the Scourge ship's line of sight. They shot out the other side, directly into the path of the drifting, burning wreckage. You're insane, Anya breathed, but her fingers were already keying in the targeting data. Target locked, she confirmed a second later. Fire, Elias yelled. The penetrator charge, a high-density tungsten spike designed to crack open asteroids, launched from the shuttle. It was a slow, clumsy projectile, but it was true. It slammed into the exposed, glowing reactor of the dead frigate. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the wreckage of the U-Suite S. Nomad was consumed by a silent, brilliant flash of pure white light. The resulting electromagnetic pulse washed over them, and every system on the Prospector screamed and died. They were adrift, powerless, tumbling in the dark. But through the viewport, Elias watched as the Scourge hunter-killer, its attention now fully on the massive energy release, diverted its course to investigate the miniature nova, its green plasma cannons firing into the heart of the blast. The decoy had worked. The return to Terminus was a silent, tense affair. Anya, a miracle worker with a circuit board, managed to reboot the shuttle's primary systems after a terrifying 15 minutes of dead silence. They slipped back into the station's hidden docking bay under complete calm silence, the great blast doors grinding shut behind them, sealing them back inside their rock. The moment they were inside, the carefully controlled world of Terminus shattered. The hum of the station felt different now, fragile, a heartbeat away from being silenced forever. Medics rushed a stabilized but still unconscious Rostova to the infirmary while Elias, Anya, and Jax were met by a furious Administrator Thorn. You've killed us all, Thorn hissed, his face ashen with terror and rage, his voice barely a whisper but carrying the weight of condemnation. He had sealed the command deck, and the rest of the council looked on, their faces a mixture of fear and accusation. You led them right to us. That thing is sitting out there. Elias, it's circling us like a vulture. It was coming for the Nomad anyway. Elias countered, his voice raw with exhaustion. He held up the data cylinder Rostova had given him. This is why. This is a key. A map fragment leading to a place called Haven, a last sanctuary for humanity. The war isn't over, never was. And now, it's at our door, whether we like it or not, the command center erupted. Gregor, the old miner, stared at the cylinder with something akin to religious awe, while others sided with Thorn, yelling about the sanctity of their isolation, the madness of inviting a war into their home. The argument raged, a battle between the crushing terror of the present and the impossible glimmer of a future. Elias felt a profound weariness settle into his bones. He was an engineer, a problem solver who worked with schematics and stress tolerances. He didn't know how to fix a people fractured by fear. He left them to their shouting, making his way to the infirmary. Rostova was awake, propped up on a medical cot, an IV dripping nutrients into her arm. The station's chief medical officer, a stern woman named Dr. Eris, gave Elias a curt nod. She's stable. For now. Lost a lot of blood. She's stronger than she looks. Elias pulled a stool up to the cot. Rostova's fierce green eyes tracked his every move. Did you get away clean? She asked, her voice stronger now. For a given value of clean, Elias replied. The Scourge ship is still out there. It's blockading us. She nodded, a grim understanding on her face. Standard hunter tactics. It's a Reaver-class vessel. It won't attack directly. Not at first. It will probe, test, and terrorize. It will launch Stalker's small, semi-sentient scout drones. They'll map the asteroid, find your heat vents, your communication arrays, your weakest structural points. They're looking for a way to crack you open, to get at the soft meat inside. Her words sent a chill down his spine. The Scourge weren't just brutal. They were intelligent, cunning. They don't just kill, do they? Elias asked, the memory of the butchered crew on the Nomad fresh in his mind. Rostova's expression darkened. No, they harvest. And they take populations, break them down, repurpose their genetic material for their bioships and warriors. To them, we're not a species to be conquered. We are a resource to be consumed. The sheer alien horror of it was staggering. This was a war not for territory, but for existence itself. The data core, she pressed, her gaze intense. The rendezvous for the Odyssey is in 3 weeks. You have to get it to them. It's our only chance to regroup, to use the Haven key. 3 weeks. Elias let out a humorless laugh. I'll be lucky if we survive the next 3 days. The administrator wants to power everything down. Play dead. Hope they get bored and leave. They won't, Rostova said, her voice flat and certain. They know you're here. The hunt has begun. Hiding is no longer an option. He knew she was right. He left the infirmary and returned to the command deck. The shouting had subsided into a tense, fearful silence. Thorn was staring at the main tactical display, where a single hostile red icon circled their asteroid. A patient predator. Dozens of smaller icons. The stalker drones Rostova had warned him about were detaching from the mothership, beginning their slow, methodical sweep of the station's rocky shell. The sight of it seemed to break something in Thorn. He turned to Elias, his face a mask of defeated despair. What do we do? Vance, we're miners and technicians, not soldiers. We have no weapons, no fleet. We're trapped. Elias looked at the same screen, but he saw something different. He saw the labyrinth of mining tunnels he knew better than the back of his own hand. He saw the high-powered plasma drills capable of melting through solid rock. He saw the geological penetrator charges, the seismic surveyors, the massive, powerful machinery of their daily survival. They weren't weapons of war, but they were tools, and he was the man who knew how to use every last one of them. He placed the data core on the central console, the dim light glinting off its armored surface. It was a promise of a future they might never see. But for the first time since the Scourge ship had appeared, he felt the icy grip of fear begin to recede, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. You're right. We're not soldiers, Elias said, his voice ringing with a newfound authority that silenced the room. We're miners. We're engineers. We live inside a giant, unstable rock full of heavy industrial equipment. They think they've trapped us in a tomb. He looked from Thorn to Gregor, to Anya, who had just entered the room, meeting the eyes of the council one by one. I think it's time we showed them they've trapped themselves in a weapon. The first stalker found a weakness. It was a thermal exhaust vent for the lower-level hydroponics bay, a tiny 2-meter fissure on the far side of the asteroid, almost impossible to detect. The drone, a spindly, insect-like machine with multiple optical sensors and delicate manipulator arms, latched onto the rock face and began to cut. Inside the newly christened War Room, the repurposed Geological Survey Center, a klaxon blared, and a red light flashed on a schematic of the station. "Hull breach in Sector Gamma 7, Anya announced, her voice calm and professional, belying the knot of tension in her stomach. Pressure is holding, but they're through the outer rock." Elias stood over the central holographic table, which now displayed a real-time tactical map of Terminus. Every tunnel, every conduit, every piece of functional machinery tagged and cataloged. The Stalker was represented by a small, pulsing red triangle. "They're testing us," Rostova said from a chair in the corner, a data slate in her lap. She was still weak, but her mind was sharp. Her military experience an invaluable and terrifying resource. "It's a classic Scourge probe. They'll send a small boarding party, something to gauge our response, our capabilities, our willingness to fight." Thorne, who now looked less like an administrator and more like a ghost haunting the proceedings, wrung his hands. "Boarding party, they're coming inside Jax," Elias said, ignoring Thorne's rising panic. "Take a team of 4 to intersection Gamma 7 Delta. Set up a choke point. No heroics. I want a wall of plasma fire the moment they clear that access tunnel. We deny them a single inch." Jax, armed with a heavy-duty mining laser that had been crudely modified into a shoulder-mounted cannon, gave a grim nod. "You got it, boss." The wait was agonizing. On the tactical display, but they watched as the red triangle stopped moving. And then, a few minutes later, 5 smaller icons detached from it, slowly making their way into the maintenance corridor. In the War Room, they could hear the comms chatter from Jax's team, the clipped, professional call-outs, the sound of heavy boots on metal grating, the low hum of charging plasma cells. Then, a sudden, explosive roar of sustained fire, the cacophony of mining lasers firing in unison, a sound that was usually a sign of progress in the ore pits, now a sound of desperate defense. The battle was over in 30 seconds. Hostiles neutralized. Jax's voice came over the comm, laced with a mix of adrenaline and awe. They weren't what I expected. Not soldiers. They were smaller. Scuttlers. I think they're called fast. But they went down easy. Rostova looked up from her slate. Scuttlers are shock troops. Cannon fodder. They're designed to swarm and overwhelm, not to fight tactically. The Reavers sent them in to die, just to see what would happen. A small victory, but it sent a ripple of confidence through the assembled council. They had faced the monster, and they had drawn blood. But Elias knew this was just the opening move. The Reaver wasn't going to be deterred by the loss of 5 drones. This was a game of chess, and they had just defended against the first pawn. Now, it was their turn to move. "Anya, bring up the schematics for the primary ore processor," Elias commanded. "The big one, in Alpha Quadrant." The crusher, the image on the holo table shifted to a massive, complex piece of machinery. A series of gigantic magnetic grinders and molecular separators that took up a cavern the size of a city block. It was the heart of their mining operation, the machine that turned useless rock into the raw materials that sustain them. "The Stalkers are mapping our energy signatures," Elias explained, his finger tracing the power conduits that fed the crusher. "This thing draws more power than the rest of the station combined. When it's running at full capacity, we light up on their sensors like a sun. They'll think it's our main reactor, our command center, our heart." Gregor, the old miner, caught on immediately, a slow, predatory grin spreading across his face. "And it's at the end of the single largest access tunnel in this whole rock. A 300-meter straight shot from the surface. Exactly, Elias said. We're going to send them an invitation. We'll vent trace amounts of atmosphere from the access tunnel's exhaust port. Make it look like a life support system. We'll overload the Crusher's power core so it bleeds energy they can't ignore. We'll make them think they've found our jugular. It's a trap. Rostova breathed, her eyes wide with a dawning respect. You're luring their main boarding party into a kill box. Not just a kill box. Elias corrected her, his expression hard as the iron they mined. We're going to turn the entire tunnel into a weapon. The plan was a marvel of improvised, desperate engineering. Under Elias's direction, the technicians and miners of Terminus turned their home into a death trap. They lined the massive ore transport tunnel with dozens of repurposed geological penetrator charges, wired to a single detonator. They rigged the tunnel's emergency atmospheric seals to slam shut on command, trapping whatever was inside. And at the far end, in the cavern housing the Great Crusher, Jax and his team set up their heavy mining lasers, creating a final, lethal crossfire. Elias, Anya, and Rostova were in a makeshift command post they'd established in an old survey station overlooking the tunnel. They watched on monitors as the bait was laid. The Crusher roared to life, its power draw making the lights flicker all over Terminus. Trace gases were vented into the void. The invitation was sent. They didn't have to wait long. Movement the sensor operator called out. The Reaver is launching its main assault craft. It's a big one. A harvester. On the main screen, a much larger vessel detached from the Catinus mothership. It was a bulky, heavily armored craft designed for planetary assault, bristling with short-range cannons and tipped with a massive, multi-jawed drilling maw. It ignored the smaller fissures the stalkers had found and made a beeline for the glowing heat signature and atmospheric traces of the main tunnel. Just as Elias had predicted, the harvester met the asteroid with a grinding shriek of metal on rock. Its drills, designed to chew through planetary crusts, made short work of the thin rock layer at the tunnel's entrance. Minutes later, the inner seal was breached, and the harvester slid into the tunnel, its landing claws gouging deep furrows in the floor. "They're in," Anya whispered, her hand hovering over a large, red button on her console. "Hold," Elias commanded, his eyes glued to the monitor showing the interior of the tunnel. The harvester's main ramp lowered, and the Scourge warriors began to pour out. These weren't the small, disposable scuttlers from before. These were the things from Rostova's nightmares and the Nomad's bloody corridors. Towering, insectoid creatures clad in biomechanical armor, their four arms ending in a combination of razor-sharp claws and integrated plasma weaponry. They moved with a terrifying, fluid grace, their multifaceted eyes scanning the darkness. They advanced down the tunnel in a disciplined formation. A wave of chitin and death. More and more poured out of the harvester, dozens of them, an overwhelming force. "They're almost at the halfway point," Anya said, her voice trembling slightly. "Hold," Elias repeated, his own heart pounding. He had to wait for the perfect moment, when the maximum number of them were inside the kill zone. Now he yelled. Anya slammed her hand down on the red button. A series of deep, concussive thuds echoed through the station as, hundreds of meters below them, the emergency seals at both ends of the tunnel slammed shut with the force of a tectonic event. The Scourge warriors were trapped. On the monitor, they saw the aliens react. A sudden, chaotic halt in their advance. They turned, firing their plasma weapons at the massive plasteel doors, but the blasts barely scratched the meters-thick barricades. "Jax, light 'em up," Elias said into his comm, his voice dangerously calm. From the far end of the tunnel, the mining lasers opened up, Beams of pure, concentrated heat, designed to melt solid rock, sliced through the trapped scourge ranks. Chitinous armor boiled away, and alien bodies exploded in flashes of green ichor and superheated steam. The tunnel became a charnel house, a shooting gallery of death. The scourge, for all their savagery, were caught completely by surprise, their own disciplined formation turning into a liability as they bunched together, easy targets for the relentless beams. But it wasn't over. A few of the warriors, larger and more heavily armored than the rest, weathered the initial barrage. They began to advance through the fire, their own weapons returning a blistering volley that sent Jax's team scrambling for cover. "Elias, they're pushing through," Jax shouted over the comms, the sound of plasma impacts screaming in the background. "These things are tougher than the rest. We can't hold them." Elias looked at Rostova. She nodded, her face grim. "Praetorians, elite guard, they'll adapt. You have to finish it now." Elias took a deep breath. This was the final, terrible part of his plan. The part he hadn't fully explained to the council. He keyed in a sequence on his own console, a command that bypassed a dozen safety protocols. "Anya, get Jax and his team clear of the Crusher Cavern. Full retreat." "Now." "What are you doing?" Anya asked, her eyes wide with alarm. "Finishing it," Elias said. He activated the final command. Deep in the station, the fail-safes on the primary ore processor disengaged. The massive magnetic grinders of the Crusher began to spin at impossible speeds, far beyond their operational limits. The machine screamed, a high-pitched, metallic shriek of tortured metal that they could feel even in their command post. The power core, now completely overloaded, began to glow cherry red. "Magnetic containment is failing," Anya read from her console, her voice a horrified whisper. "The core is going to breach." Elias watched the monitors as the surviving Praetorians, their armor scorched and glowing, finally broke through the laser crossfire and stormed into the Crusher Cavern. They paused for a moment, perhaps sensing the immense, unstable energy building in the massive machine before them. Then, the Crusher's magnetic core detonated. It wasn't a conventional explosion, it was a release of pure, unrestrained magnetic force. The entire cavern and the 300-meter tunnel leading to it were subjected to an instantaneous, godlike gravity shear. Everything made of metal the Harvester, the Scourge Warriors' biomechanical armor, their weapons, their very bodies was simultaneously ripped apart and crushed into a single AOE, hyper-compressed ball of scrap at the heart of the machine. The feedback from the detonation blew out every monitor in the command post, plunging them into darkness. The only sound the dying, tortured groan of the station's power grid. The hum of Terminus faltered, nearly died, and then, slowly, shudderingly, stabilized. They had won. They had cut off the monster's claw. But in doing so, they had just crippled their station's heart. They were alive, but their ability to mine, to process ore, to survive in the long term, was now gone. And outside, the monster, wounded and enraged, was still waiting. The silence in the aftermath was more terrifying than the battle. The familiar, life-sustaining hum of Terminus was gone, replaced by a wounded, intermittent groan from the emergency power systems. Red-lit emergency strobes cast long, dancing shadows down every corridor, turning their home into a flickering, claustrophobic tomb. In the darkened war room, the shock was palpable. They had survived, but the cost was monumental. The tactical display was a sea of red icons, denoting critical system failures across half the station. The Crusher was gone. A radioactive, magnetically unstable crater at the heart of their industrial sector. Their primary power conduits were fused, their main ore processing capabilities annihilated. We're running on tertiary life support, Anya reported, her voice hollow in the gloom. Enough power for basic atmospherics and minimal gravity for maybe 3 months. After that, the air scrubbers fail. The water recyclers shut down. We won't starve, but we'll suffocate in our own filth. The stark reality of her words settled over the room like a shroud. They had won the battle, only to be handed a slower, more certain death sentence. Thorn, who had been catatonic during the fight, finally stirred. A broken man. 3 months. He whispered, the words catching in his throat. You saved us from the monster only to strand us on a dying rock. Before Elias could respond, Rostova spoke, her voice cutting through the despair with the sharp edge of a soldier's pragmatism. You've done more than strand yourselves. You've enraged it. She pointed to the one monitor still functioning, the deep-range sensor display. The red icon of the Reaver-class hunter-killer was no longer circling patiently. It was moving closer, its energy signature flaring, pulsing with what could only be described as fury. Scourge Command is hierarchical, but their ship-class vessels have a degree of autonomy, a predatory cunning. You haven't just killed its boarding party, you've humiliated it. It won't just probe anymore. It'll break you. Let it try. Jack's voice boomed as he entered the room, his face smudged with soot, his makeshift cannon slung over his shoulder. He was followed by the remnants of his team, their expressions a mixture of exhaustion and a newfound, hard-won confidence. We beat 'em once. We can beat 'em again. Rostova shook her head. You won with a brilliant, sacrificial gambit. You can't pull a trick like that twice. The Reaver won't fall for another lure. Now it will come for you with overwhelming force. It will start tearing this asteroid apart, piece by piece, with its main weapon until it exposes you. Elias looked from Jax's defiant anger to Thorn's broken despair, feeling the weight of 3,000 lives on his shoulders. Hiding was no longer an option. Their home was a ticking clock, and fighting a defensive war against a superior foe was a slow-motion suicide. There was only one path left, a path so insane, so utterly suicidal, that he had barely allowed himself to consider it until now. We can't stay here, Elias said, his voice quiet but firm, drawing the eyes of everyone in the room. Terminus is dying. Our only hope is to get Rostova's data core to the fleet, to Haven. Thorn let out a dry, rattling laugh. And how do you propose we do that? Vance, fly the entire asteroid to the Serpent's Nebula. The only ship we have is your glorified tin can, the Prospector, which couldn't possibly slip past that monster. You're right. Elias agreed. Walking over to the main schematic of the station, he brought up an image of a section of the station that hadn't been used in decades. A place that was little more than a ghost story to the younger generation, the old shipyards. The Prospector can't make it, but she can. He zoomed in on a massive, hulking shape deep within the rock. A ship that had been under construction when the Scourge came and the galaxy fell silent. It was a behemoth, a colonial heavy freighter, designed for deep space hauling, its skeletal frame integrated directly into the asteroid structure. U.C.S. Venture, a ship that was 70 years obsolete and had never once tasted the void. Gregor's eyes widened, a flicker of memory in his old gaze. The Venture, stars and stones. My grandfather was a frame welder on that thing. They never finished it. The primary reactor was never installed. The navigation systems were never brought online. But the frame is there, Elias countered, his mind already racing, calculating, solving the impossible equation. The hull is sound. It was built to withstand the rigors of interstellar travel. It's a shell, a promise. We have 3 months. We are 3,000 engineers, miners, and technicians. This station may be a tomb, but it's also a scrapyard filled with every component we need. The idea was audacious, a desperate, beautiful act of defiance. To resurrect a ghost ship, to cannibalize their dying home to give birth to a new one, all while under siege from an alien predator. It was a race against time, a battle on 2 fronts, one against the slow decay of their life support, the other against the imminent, violent wrath of the Reaver. A new kind of energy filled the room, replacing despair with a frantic, desperate purpose. Rostova looked at Elias, a slow, unreadable smile playing on her lips. You miners are full of surprises, but even if you get that relic flying, you still have to get past the blockade. Elias's gaze drifted to the schematic of the Reaver that Rostova had pieced together from her fleet's intelligence. His eyes focused on a specific point on the alien vessel's underbelly, a section marked as a secondary energy conduit, heavily armored but theoretically vulnerable. Every machine has a breaking point, Elias said softly. Every predator has a blind spot. The next 2 months were a blur of controlled chaos, a testament to the indomitable spirit of a people with nothing left to lose. Terminus transformed. The rigid social structure of miners, technicians, and administrators dissolved into a single, unified workforce. Under the combined leadership of Elias's engineering genius, Gregor's old-world knowledge of the ship's original construction, and Rostova's tactical discipline, the resurrection of the venture began. Teams swarmed over the skeletal freighter like ants, their welding torches and plasma cutters casting a constant, brilliant light in the cavernous shipyard. They cannibalized Terminus with a ruthless efficiency. The secondary reactor from the water processing plant was painstakingly removed and jury-rigged to serve as the venture's main power source. Navigation sensors were stripped from old survey drones. The command consoles from the mining operations deck were grafted into the freighter's bridge. It was a Frankenstein's monster of a ship, a patchwork of old and new, held together by ingenuity and desperation. While the station worked, Rostova trained. She turned Jax and 100 of the strongest, bravest miners into a makeshift militia. They learned basic fireteam tactics in the empty corridors, drilled on the firing range with their modified mining lasers, and studied Scourge anatomy and weaknesses from the Nomad's data logs. They were no longer victims waiting for the end. They were becoming soldiers preparing for a fight. All the while, the Reaver watched. It had stopped its probing attacks, content to sit in the darkness, a patient executioner. It was a constant, oppressive presence on their sensors, a reminder of the doom that awaited them if they failed. Elias lived in the shipyards, fueled by caffeine-laced nutrient paste and sheer force of will. He slept in 4-hour shifts on a cot next to the humming, unstable reactor, his mind a constant whirlwind of power flow diagrams and structural integrity calculations. Anya was his shadow, his second in command, translating his frantic genius into actionable plans for the work crews. One cycle, as they stood on the gantry overlooking the nearly completed bridge, she handed him a steaming mug. "You need to rest, Elias. You'll burn yourself out." He took a sip, the bitter liquid doing little to chase away the exhaustion etched onto his face. "We are running out of time, Anya. The last atmospheric processor is showing signs of critical failure. We have maybe 2 weeks of breathable air left, not 4. He looked out at the ship taking shape below them, a symbol of their collective hope and madness. Even if we get her flying, the reactor is unstable. It will get us to the rendezvous, but it won't last much longer than that. This is a one-way trip to a mythical safe haven, through a gauntlet guarded by a relentless killing machine. The final piece of the puzzle was the most dangerous. They needed a weapon, something powerful enough to cripple the Reaver and give them a window to escape. Elias found his answer not in a weapon system, but in a mining tool, the station's main seismic resonance drill. It was a massive piece of equipment, designed to project focused sonic vibrations deep into the asteroid's core to map geological structures. It had never been designed to be fired. Rerouting the station's remaining power to the drill was a monumental task, but they managed it, turning the entire forward section of Terminus into a giant, untested sonic cannon. Their plan was as simple as it was suicidal. They would launch the venture, using the chaos of the launch to mask their true intent. As the freighter cleared the asteroid, the entire population of Terminus, now aboard their ark, would have one shot. They would fire the seismic drill directly at the Reaver's vulnerable underbelly. If it worked, it might stun the alien ship long enough for them to make a jump to subspace. If it failed, the power feedback would vaporize the rest of the station and them along with it. The day came. The last of the supplies were loaded. The last of the 3,000 souls boarded the UCS Venture from the freighter's newly installed view screen on the bridge. Elias looked out at the empty, darkened corridors of Terminus for the last time. The hum was gone forever. It was a ghost station, a husk that had given its life so they might live all hands secure for launch. His voice echoed through the ship's new comm system. Reactor is green. Navigation is, well, it's online, Anya reported from the co-pilot seat. Jax and Rostova stood behind them, the command crew for this desperate voyage. Elias's hand hovered over the launch control. He took one last look at the Reaver on the tactical display. Still waiting, still watching. "Take us out," he said. Massive explosive bolts blew the Venture free from the rock that had been its cradle and its prison for 70 years. The freighter, groaning under the strain, slid out of the asteroid and into the cold, silent void. For the first time, humanity's last survivors saw the stars, and, waiting for them, its weapons glowing with malevolent green energy, was the monster, the UCS. Venture emerged from its rocky womb like a newborn into a war zone. Through the bridge's main view screen, the Reaver was no longer a distant icon, but a visceral, terrifying reality. It filled their view, a predator of chitin and malice, its hull shimmering with the sickly green bioluminescence that seemed to burn with pure hatred. It had been waiting for this moment, and it made no move to attack, letting the lumbering freighter clear the asteroid as if savoring the kill. "It's toying with us," Rostova said, her voice tight, her knuckles white where she gripped the back of a console. "It wants us in open space, away from the cover of the rock. It wants to make an example of us." Elias's hands flew across the controls, his focus absolute. The Venture was a clumsy beast, a freighter, not a frigate, and it handled like a brick. He felt the ship's patchwork systems groaning under the strain, the unstable reactor thrumming a dissonant song through the deck plates. "Anya, give me a direct power feed to the main thrusters on my mark. Jax, arm the weapon. All power to the seismic drill. Drain everything else if you have to." "Draining secondary life support," Anya confirmed, her voice steady. "If this doesn't work, we'll start losing air in 10 minutes. "We won't need 10 minutes," Elias replied grimly. He watched the distance indicator on his display, a countdown to their one desperate shot. The Reaver, confident in its superiority, began to turn, bringing its main plasma cannon to bear. a weapon capable of cracking a moon. "It's charging its primary weapon," Rostova warned. "We have seconds, Jax. Now," Elias roared, back on the husk of Terminus. A chain reaction of commands rerouted the last vestiges of the station's power into the massive seismic drill. The entire forward section of the asteroid glowed with a fierce, blue-white energy, the rock itself groaning under the impossible strain. Then it fired. There was no sound in the void, but on the bridge of the Venture, they felt it a deep, seismic shudder that vibrated through the very fabric of space. It wasn't a beam of light or a projectile, but a wave of pure, concentrated sonic force, an invisible hammer strike of impossible magnitude. The wave crossed the distance in an instant and slammed into the Reaver's underbelly. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. The alien ship's energy shields flared, absorbing the impact. Elias's heart sank. It had failed, but the seismic charge wasn't an energy weapon. It was a physical one. While the shields dissipated the thermal and kinetic energy, the resonant frequency, the very vibration of the blast, passed through them. The Reaver's chitinous hull, designed to withstand plasma and projectiles, began to vibrate sympathetically. Micro-fractures spiderwebbed across its underbelly. The sickly green glow of its internal systems flickered, stuttered, and then, with a cascade of silent, internal explosions, went dark. The Scourge ship convulsed, its main weapon discharging its stored energy in a wild, uncontrolled blast that tore harmlessly into empty space. It began to drift, crippled and silent. A stunned silence filled the bridge, broken a second later by a wild, joyous cheer from the crew. They had done it. The impossible shot had landed. "Anya, now!" Elias yelled, snapping them back to the present. "All power to the engines. Get us out of here before it comes back online." Anya slammed her hand on the console, and the Venture lurched forward, its engines screaming as they pushed the overloaded reactor to its absolute limit. They accelerated away from their dead home, away from the crippled Predator, their trajectory a straight, desperate line towards the Serpent's nebula. As they built up speed for the jump to subspace, Elias took one last look back. He saw the dark, silent shape of Terminus, the rock that had been his entire world, now just a tombstone in the void. He saw the wounded Reaver, its light slowly, ominously, beginning to flicker back to life. They had not killed it, merely stunned it. But it was enough. "Engaging subspace drive," Anya announced, her voice filled with a mixture of terror and awe. The view screen dissolved into a tunnel of swirling, non-Euclidean light, and the crushing weight of normal space was replaced by the strange, disorienting sensation of the jump. They were away. They were free. The journey through subspace was a tense, surreal affair. The Venture, never designed for such travel, protested loudly. The reactor fluctuated wildly. Alarms blared at random intervals, and the patchwork systems required constant, delicate nursing from Anya and her engineering teams. They were a ghost ship sailing an unreal sea, and every moment felt borrowed. Rostova, using the data core and the ship's old star charts, guided them, calling out course corrections that felt more like acts of faith than navigation. During the quiet moments, Elias would walk the corridors of his new, strange home. The ship was crowded, filled with the 3,000 souls of Terminus learning to live in the confines of a vessel instead of a rock. He saw the faces of the children, who looked out at the swirling chaos of subspace with wide, uncomprehending eyes, and he felt the profound weight of the promise he had made to them. He found Gregor in the forward observation lounge, the old miner staring out at the impossible colors. "My grandfather would have been proud," Gregor said, his voice thick with emotion. "He always believed this ship would fly one day. He said it was a ship of hope." Hope. It was a fragile, dangerous thing. But it was all they had left. After 3 weeks that felt like a lifetime, they arrived. They dropped out of subspace into a sea of roiling, beautiful gas clouds, the Serpent's Nebula, and there, waiting for them, was a sight that made every soul on the venture weep. A fleet. Not a massive armada, but a scattered, ragtag collection of a dozen ships, bearing the faded blue markings of the United Colonies. At its center was a vessel that dwarfed the others, a battle-scarred but still majestic Aegis-class dreadnought, the U.C.S. Odyssey. A voice, crisp and clear, crackled over their comms. The first friendly voice from the outside world they had ever heard. "Unidentified vessel. This is Admiral Jorik of the Aegis Fleet flagship Odyssey. You are broadcasting an alliance signal. Please identify yourselves." Elias stepped up to the comm station, his voice hoarse. "Admiral Jorik, this is Acting Captain Elias Vance of the freighter Venture. We are the survivors of the Terminus mining colony. We have Corporal Eva Rostova, and we have the Haven Key." The transmission of the data course sent a shockwave through the small fleet. Within the hour, the Venture was docked with the Odyssey, and Elias, Rostova, and the rest of his command crew were standing on the bridge of the flagship, a place of gleaming chrome and disciplined military efficiency that was a world away from their makeshift command center. Admiral Jorik was an old man, his face a stern mask of command, but his eyes held a deep, weary sadness. He looked at Elias, at the exhausted faces of the miners-turned-soldiers beside him, and then at the data core held in a technician's hands. "For 70 years, Jorik said, his voice heavy with the weight of those years. We have fought a losing war. We have been hunted, scattered, reduced to ghosts. We held on to the legend of Haven as a prayer, a final, desperate hope. You, a colony we thought had perished with all the others, have delivered that hope." He turned to a tactical officer. "Plot a course. Send the key to the rest of the fleet. It's time to go home." And their arrival at Haven was not the triumphant moment they had imagined. Using the key, the fleet navigated a treacherous, hidden route through the nebula to a single, Earth-like world orbiting a young, yellow sun. It was beautiful, a pristine jewel of blue oceans and green continents. But it was also empty. There was no secret colony, no thriving city waiting to welcome them. There were only ruins, the vine-choked remains of a settlement that had died out thousands of years ago, built by a pre-human race they would never know. The legend of Haven was a lie, a false hope. Despair, colder and more profound than any they had faced, threatened to consume the last remnants of humanity. But as Elias stood on the surface of this new, empty world, breathing fresh, clean air for the first time in his life, feeling real soil under his boots, he didn't feel despair. He looked up at the Venture in orbit, his ugly, beautiful, impossible ship. He thought of the people of Terminus, who had turned their tomb into a weapon, their prison into an ark. Haven wasn't a place you found. It was a thing you built. The legend was wrong, Elias said, standing beside Admiral Jorik on a cliff overlooking the ocean. There's nothing here for us. Jorik looked out at the horizon, at the ships of his fleet beginning to descend, bringing the last of his people to this new shore. You're wrong, Captain, the old admiral said, a faint, weary smile touching his lips. "There's everything here for us." The war with the Scourge was not over. The Reaver they had crippled was just one claw of an endless beast. But here, on this forgotten world, they had a chance to rebuild, to regroup, to grow strong. The hum of Terminus was gone, silenced forever. But as the survivors began the arduous task of building a new home under an alien sun, a new sound began to take its place, the sound of hammers and saws, of children's laughter, of a people who had been to the very brink of extinction and had chosen, defiantly, to live. It was the sound of humanity, beginning again.